Hello everyone and welcome back to the FRC Historian. Today I'm going to be talking about the response that I got as well as the research that I did for it on my survey. So please let me know any ideas you have because this was actually quite interesting. I got a question asking about what games had the most points, and what I mean by that is what games in the past so many years have had the most points on the board. So what I did was I went to every single year. I chose 3 divisions. I took all the elim matches because the scores in elims are always higher than regular. Then I averaged all those scores, as well as taking the max ones, and then rated each of them, the average and max, to see which games had the highest scores and which games had the lowest. I'm going to talk a little bit about the games, and then in general about higher scores and lower scores and how they make the game feel. So today I'm going to be starting out with the highest average score, and I'll be going from there. So if you want to talk about the game with the highest average score, there is no doubt in my mind that you'd think anything other than 2017 Steamworks. You all know in Steamworks that every rotor you got was 40 points. One, you could get an out of time and then any out of time was 60 points. So if you got 3 gears down the pegs and out of time, that was 120 points. Then 40 for another one, and then 140 for another one, for another gear in teleop. So all 4 rotors was quite a few points, as well as getting fuel even more. The thing about this game is that the average in elims for 3 divisions that I randomly selected was 418.18125 points. And believe it or not, the max is also 550 from this game. So when you go into the average of this, the average 418. Part of this game was if you weren't playing effective defense, both teams could put up quite an amount of points, where in some cases you'd see teams win by almost 10 points, making the average very high for all of them. And this does include matches where there are penalties and also disqualifications. One thing about 2017 though is I remember when there was the search for the high score, one of the hard parts about getting a high score was after 4 rotors, which anyone could get, then it came down to fuel. And when it came down to fuel, it was three wiffle balls into the boiler. That was 1 point. So you'd see teams going, okay, let's see how many points we can get. And that was part of it. And since it was so hard to do, you'd see the high score ever changing. So next up, we're going to go on to the second one, which is also unsurprisingly 2018, with 339.7142857 points as the average in 2018. One of the things about 2018 that makes the average lower is that whenever you were scoring, the other alliance was not scoring, which was part of the whole game where you had ownership of the scale or you didn't. Meaning that if you were winning as the red alliance, the blue alliance would have a much lower score. And this was averaging all scores. Part of 2018 was that there was no real world high score, because I did the math. The max score was about 500 points, because you can't get extra points without penalties, because the game is almost clockwork, where if you're able to play the correct boosts, forces, you have a levitate, you get the climbs. When everything is set in stone, there's only so many points you can get in that game. Next up on to the third one, which is 2014, going down a little bit to 204.726415 blind points. The thing about 2014 was that you could play effective defense, but it was a high-scoring game for the most part. You could get quite a few points for passing the ball to each other and then shooting over the trusses, and then scoring when you had your meter filled, as well as shooting over the trusses would also get you points. So you could get a lot of points in this game, especially during lot of time if you were able to shoot during the correct time, with many teams getting 2 and the cheesy poofs getting 3 ball latons. And with this game, this was effectively 204 was quite a high average for this game, and defense was incredibly accurate, because I'll just let you know right now that the max for 2014 was 390 points, which really goes to show that since about half of that score is the average, it does show that quite a bit of defense was played, and there were some really good matchups in 2014. Next up on to 2015, the average score was 192.7 points. This kind of makes sense because at the beginning of every match, one alliance would end up winning the can grab, and whenever you won the can grab, you'd have a large advantage when it came to teleop over the other alliance, as you all know. And with that came the fact that you couldn't score too much without it. But one of the other things about 2015 was that there was no finite amount that you could score, as shown by IRI having incredibly high match scores. But at the same time, it just came down to time, and many alliances couldn't score very, very much. And part of the 2015 game was, since there was no defense, there could be close matches. I mean, even though the fact that number 1 was probably the best robot, they picked number 2, there could be close matches in 2015. There actually were more upsets than I would have thought in 2015. And also, especially with no defense, the high scores were the highest that Alliance could possibly score in the given time. Next up, 2013, with an average of 183.9387755. This due in part to the fact that I believe that the scores could get a lot higher than that, but there was effective defense, because I remember watching the 2013, I want to say Troy district, where the hot team was able to just sit at the loading station and they would just shoot frisbees nonstop. That would be their entire strategy, and if a team were to even touch them, their aim would be off and they'd miss. And there was a lot of that in the game, where there would be many teams who could score quite accurately, except if they were played defense upon. That's why you'd see lower scores than the max scores in 2013 because of the defense. And also the fact that some teams could do the endgame bonus, but not everyone, which made it quite an interesting game with a world high score that was ever fluctuating, because more and more teams could score more points, especially during elims. Next up, 2016 with an average of 178.239.304 points. This one doesn't surprise me as much due to the fact that there was a lot of defense, as well as the fact that everyone was able to clear the defenses quite well. But then when it came to boulders, that was an interesting story, because during odd time they'd be worth 10 points, and Teleapp they'd be worth 5. So this was one where I love following the world high score, because unlike Steamworks the year after, you'd be able to follow it as every boulder you score was 5 points. So your goal would be to get as many points as possible, and the teams who could score more boulders ended up getting the world high score in certain matches, and that was very fun to watch over the course of the year. So next up, 2004 with an average score of 102.5. Now with 2004's game, First Frenzy, what was interesting watching was that there were actually quite a few robots who had problems I see more of now. For instance, Wildstain fell in the semis of their division, falling over, only getting 20 points. Part of the struggle being you had to score oh so many points. There are many things you could do in First Frenzy racing the bar. And you could actually see a lot of matches where the scores got ever so close to each other. Of course, there was defense, but this was a different kind of game, compared to now, which it should be as far as we've come. This was also a 2-player game, so if your alliance partner fell, then good luck in the next match. It really goes to show that if you had an alliance partner playing defense, that was half your alliance. The other alliance partner would have to play. And if one of your alliance partners was out of the competition, your score tanked, as well as the average, for that matter. Next up is 2011, with the average score of 98.291, 6 repeating. And part of this game was, you could get some high scores in this game. However, there are many times while there was defense, or say in the end game, where you'd see that the mini-bots wouldn't shoot up right, or there was some sort of field or robot malfunction where you wouldn't be able to get all the points. We all know that the Cheesy Poofs won their first championship here with Wildstain, and they were able to score quite a high margin, but there were some times where defenses played where they couldn't do it. Next up, First Overdrive with 89.53191489 points as an average. Part of what happened with Overdrive it was interesting because this was, other than the aerial assist, the only game where the field was completely clear, where your goal would be go around, hit the balls off the top, shoot them over, shoot them on top of it, you get a lot of points for it. That also, I see a lot of parallels between this game and aerial assist, except for the fact that you try to shoot on top of the trusses instead of over them. And there was no specific end game, just like 2014. And part of this game was interesting because the amount of defense you could play, the amount of quick bots you could make, because in this game there was no real field interference, so you could make the bot go really fast, shoot a lot, and it just came down to how fast you could shoot them, with many alliances opting for their second picks, who were lower in the rankings, to be able to play effective defense, stopping the higher scoring robots, leading to upsets. Next up, we're going to go to right to next year with Lunacy 2009. So for those of you who haven't watched Lunacy, Lunacy is the most obscure game of FRST. I'm not saying that to deter any Lunacy fans, just for the fact that they changed the field, making it different. All of the robots use different wheels. There was it almost felt like a robot was on the moon with a different feel and everything. And part of the idea was that you scored by putting so many points into the robot. So you'd have many teams with really, really efficient human players filling it up, as well as them picking up off the ground, making defense a must use in this game, being able to intercept. And part of this was the scores in Lunacy weren't as high as other ones because the points weren't overvalued. One thing that I definitely see is that in 2017 and 18, first started using the idea of overvaluing different points to make it interesting. Of, oh, look, this team just scored so many points. And one of the interesting things I saw last year was, I remember there were so many penalty points. Someone said, oh, look, the Cheesy Poofs just scored 700 points. Like, wow, that's a lot of penalty points. Because up until in the last 2 years, they really wanted to make really, really high point values because that looks interesting once you get back to it. 2009 was an interesting game, and what's interesting is that Hot won 2009 and 2010, making it such that they won 2009 a very interesting game, and then 2010 the year right after. Now I'm going to move on to 2012. This was Rebound Rumble. This was actually quite an interesting game in my opinion, especially with the trusses at the end, especially with the bounce beam at the end. I saw a few teams like OP using a pneumatic piston to get them back up if they were off the ground. They're on the ground. You'd see a lot of teams who would try their hardest. There were actually many teams who just made the win because they were able to just shoot faster than the other teams. This was a year that didn't have the highest scores comparably to years around them, especially with, this was a year that had not the highest scores, especially with 2011 and 2013 with higher scores than them. But 2012 was quite an interesting game. Part of the problem that I had with 2012 was the idea that it all came down to how fast you could shoot. Because if another alliance had a bot that could shoot slightly faster than you, then they could go on. As well as the bounce beams at the end being quite tricky, especially if a robot you're playing with isn't exactly your weight, because many teams didn't go for the maximum amount of weight, with many teams opting to only go for the 2 instead of the 3 robots on the bounce beam. And there was defense play which allowed the average score to be lower than the max scores. Next up on 2006, where in this game the average score was 68.60784314. So now for in 2006 aim high, FRST was able to make an effective game where defense was. So basically, if you couldn't tell already, defense has been an important factor in keeping all of these scores lower for the average scores. For that matter, with 2006 having a max score of 171, whereas the average score was 68, which really goes to show that it's almost 1/3 of the max score, showing that this was a more one-sided game where the teams who won had much higher scores than the ones who lost, as well as the fact that the ones who lost being able to play effective defense, keeping the other scores down. So now for those of you who are wondering where 2019 fits into this, what I did was I took the 3 largest value points from 23 competitions with the highest point values, and then took the elims from there, that being Central Valley, Ontario to Tacumber, and then the Orange County Regional, and then where all 3 of those, if you want to see how they match up. So far, the 2019 average score from those in the elims has been 60.21276596. Now this game, what I've seen that's interesting is a lot of upsets so far because of the availability of defense, and in those earlier things where people weren't using their rockets, you'd be able to push a robot around, making them nullify a score, not be able to score inside of the cargo ship, as well as there only being a few teams who were physically able to put in a successful 3rd tier climb where others weren't able to. So the ones who couldn't opted to try and score where they could, trying to put the null hatch panels on and score as many as they could, with the average score only being, average score was more low, about 60 points. And the max score of those three was over 100. So it really goes to show the amount of defense that's been able to be played at these events. Next up is 2007 with an average score of around 58.5 points with Rock and Roll. And with this team, with this year, part of it also, I really hate to sound like a broken record, but honestly, defense. This was an interesting game where even on Einstein it looked a lot like other competitions where your goal is just to keep putting more and more inner tubes on the rack, getting more points. And then what's interesting is the amount of bots who played ramp bots, the amount of ramps on the field. Whereas there'd be some teams who were able to effectively build a successful ramp as well as pick up game pieces, where it was hard to make a balance. Making it such that there are many alliances where a team would pick a designated ramp bot who wasn't able to score as much, making it such that the average score in this game wasn't as high, because you might have to sacrifice a high score to be able to do the end game. Next, we're going on to 2005 Triple Play. This is the first ever use of a third bot in an alliance during match play, calling it Triple Play, designating the third member of the alliance. So for those of you who are interested, I can go more into the 2005 game later, but the average score was about 45.5, and if you want to compare that to the max score in 2005, the max score was 96, so it was about half. So teams were able to use their second robot effectively to shut down the other alliance. Next up, 2003, with an average score of around 40, 39.2755102. Of course, this is all in your divisions, by the way, where that average score was able to be maintained because of the constant battering of the different cans onto your side and stacking them to be able to make as many points as you can. Whereas there's more of, if you're scoring points, the other alliance isn't, so you get very many matches that were very close together. And finally, this should come as absolutely no surprise. You know it, you love it. 2010 with an average score of 12.13. For those of you who haven't watched 2010 or my videos about 469 domination, this was a game where if your team number wasn't 469, your goal was to hit the balls into the score, and if other teams playing defense, it became incredibly hard, with many Week 1 regionals recording scores in the single digits. Whereas even on the division level, if teams were able to play effective defense, the score rarely broke 20, with an average of about 12. So there is all my averages. So now I'm going to go into the max score. Of course, I'm going to go into a lot less detail with the max scores, as well as highlighting the differences between them. So of course, the highest max score is 2017 with 550. This includes penalties, of course. Next up, 2018 with 512. Which of course uses penalties because the max score is about 500. Then after that you get 2014 with 390. Then 2015 with 290, which is quite a leave from their average score. 2013 with 288. 2007 with 286, which is quite a discrepancy from their 58. 2016 with 275. 2004 with 230. Quite a difference. 2006 with 171, 2011 with 146, 2008 with 136, 2009 with 133, 2012 with 128, 2003 with 116, 2019 with 108, 2005 with 96, and finally 2010 with, you guessed it, 24. And then also when you watch this, another thing to think about is the idea that each game is different. Each game first makes it different. So every single game piece from every single year is different worth than another. So the amount of points scored in each does not devalue the success of the alliances. If you were wondering, for those of you who are new to First, the game does change every single year. So a team being able to have continued success year after year is incredibly impressive. And one thing I'm really looking forward to is watching the rest of 2019, being able to follow up on this once they're in the divisions. And once you're in your divisional level, there is a lot of defense, there is a lot of competition, and there is a lot of things interesting to watch. So thank you all for listening. I hope you'll give me some more ideas in the comments below, and goodbye.